if you want to know what the Iliad's about, you have to look no further than the first few lines of the poem. You see, it turns out that the Iliad's not really about the Trojan War. It's actually about a clash between Achilles and Agamemnon, and how this clash and struggle gets resolved. Here are the first few lines of the poem. Rage, sing goddess Achilles' rage, black and murderous, that cost the Greeks incalculable pain, pitched countless souls of heroes into Hades' dark, and left their bodies to rot as feasts for dogs and birds, as Zeus' will was done. Begin with the clash between Agamemnon, the Greek warlord, and godlike Achilles. So, it seems like there's a fight between these two. And in fact, in Book 1, Achilles will nearly attack Agamemnon physically. But what's it all about? Here's what it's about. As the 10-year siege of the war at Troy was going on, the Greeks periodically made raids on local towns in order to pick up money, provision, supplies, slaves. In one of these raids, Achilles had picked up some beautiful women. Amongst these was Chryseis. Well, Chryseis happened to be the daughter of a priest of Apollo. And this will come into play in a minute. Achilles handed Chryseis over to Agamemnon to be his war bride. Remember, Agamemnon's married though, isn't he? Well, never mind, we'll get back to that later. So Achilles gives Agamemnon Chryseis, and when her father comes to collect her, Agamemnon treats him pretty roughly. And in fact, he threatens to beat him up and talks about how he'll be sleeping with this guy's daughter as long as she lives. Tough stuff. Tough stuff. So Chryseis then is supposed to be collected by her father, Chryseis, who is a priest of Apollo. And since Agamemnon won't give her back, Chryseis prays to Apollo, the god for whom he's a priest, and begs Apollo to punish the Greeks for the insolence that Agamemnon has shown. And at this point, Apollo walks over the hilltops with his bow and arrow. Remember, he is an archer god, and begins picking off the Greek soldiers and the Greek animals one by one, and essentially begins a plague. This plague goes on for some days. At the end of several days, the Greeks get together a council and talk about what it is they need to do. And they agree that the best thing to do is to send Chryseis back home to her father in the town of Chryse. Confused yet? You should be. It's kind of confusing. Achilles thinks this is a good plan, and Agamemnon agrees that it's the best thing to do, but is upset because suddenly he's out a slave. What's there to do but take the slave of the man who has been giving Agamemnon a time this whole war? And that is the girl of Achilles. And her name is, get this, Briseis. Yeah, they don't make it easy for you. Well, Achilles is barely able to restrain himself when Agamemnon decides to take his girl. And in fact, he almost pulls his sword, but the only thing that stops him is Athena. Athena actually flies up to him and steadies his hand to make sure he doesn't commit an act of physical violence against his leader. Well, after this, Achilles stomps off and goes back to his tent. When Agamemnon's men show up to take Briseis, he lets her go, but not without a whole lot of tears. He's pretty upset about this, and even Briseis is unwilling to go. Achilles will sit on the beach and sulk for a while until his mother comes up to help him. Who's his mother? Remember, she's Thetis, a sea nymph, and she will appear out of the water and talk to him. And what he asks her to do is this: to use her influence with Zeus to cause trouble for the Greeks. Once the Greeks are in trouble, because the Trojans are attacking them, they'll see how much they really miss him. If he's not going to fight, they're going to pay for it. This is how it'll work. Thetis will go visit Zeus, aka Jupiter, and will get him to agree that the Trojans will push the Greeks down to their ships and cause them a great deal of trouble. Well, this is quite a plan, and this is actually pretty cruel, or it would seem pretty immature for Achilles to do something like this. But there's a lot going on here, and there's a lot at stake, and this deserves some unpacking. So let's talk about some cultural considerations when we're talking about the Iliad and the Bronze Age warriors who were fighting in this battle. First of all, let's talk about what kind of culture they live in. And the best way to start this is to say that they don't live in the same kind of culture we live in. We live in what's called a guilt culture, where your self-worth is not attached to the outside, but rather how you see your actions squaring up with your reality. So, for example, if you steal a car and then you later feel bad about it, you feel bad about it because you feel guilty. And you feel guilty because you know it's wrong. That's a guilt culture, where you feel bad about something you do because you know it's wrong. Achilles does not live in a guilt culture. Achilles lives in what's called a shame culture. And this is where your self-worth is defined by how others think about you. In other words, if you mess up, you feel bad because others know about it. In other words, I stole a car, and I feel ashamed because everyone in my village knows that I stole the car. So, Achilles knows that everyone is watching him as Agamemnon takes his girl. And he feels like this brings him dishonor. What kind of people are these Greeks? They live in a shame culture, and there's so much to talk about with why they're so worried about what others think of them. Because a lot more is tied into it than how they feel about themselves. Let's get into it. Here are some terms to consider in Book 1 of the Iliad. The first is this, heros. You notice that the term to the left is a transliteration and the one to the right is actually written in Greek. And heros, or hero, is someone who is actually descended from divine blood. In other words, Achilles is not fully mortal. His mother is a goddess, and his father is immortal. This means that he's partly divine, and therefore better than others. He's capable of things that others simply cannot do. And you'll notice the theme in the story we're going to be reading is that most of the people who are worth talking about are in fact heroes. A man like Achilles is very concerned about his time. And this is his reputation, or it's what people are saying about you, the buzz, the word on the street. He's very concerned that people will say things about him when they see that Agamemnon has taken away his girl. And when people see that he has had his girl taken away, he will feel eidos, or shame. And this is something that would be not uncommon to feel in a shame culture. We'll come back to this later when we talk about Hector and his motivations for fighting. Men like Achilles, men like Odysseus, men like the other chiefs we've been talking about, have a name in Greek. Their title is basileos, which loosely translated means something like king, but really here is more like chieftain. Most of the territories they're ruling over in Greece are actually fairly small and can't be thought of as kingdoms or nation-states in the way you would think about them now. A man like Agamemnon is no basileos. He is a chief or a king who rules over other kings. So he's a chief of chiefs or king of kings, and Wanax is his title. If each of these men are concerned about their time, that is, what people are saying about them now on a certain level, they're even more worried about their kleos, or fame, or undying glory. And this is what people say about you long after you die. How do you get your kleos? You have to do or say something really great. And it's possible to get your kleos in either way, but it's better to get your kleos by doing great deeds. What kind of people do these things? People who possess arete, or personal excellence. When you possess the quality of arete, it's a habit, not just an action. It's the way you go about your life on every single day. And if you're one of these types we're talking about, these heroes who possess time and feel eidos at things, and possess this personal excellence, you're an aristos, you're one of the best. These are typically those who are in control, as in the English word aristocracy, which means rule by the best. Lastly, let's talk about this term, dike. Dike. And this is the Greek word for justice or honor. And it's what is right, but not necessarily what's fair. Remember, in the Iliad, men like Agamemnon have the right to do whatever they want to men like Achilles, who have a lower status in society. And this is demonstrated in a scene in Book 1 where Nestor, the sage advisor to the Greeks, tries to talk Achilles out of doing anything that's worse. And here's what he says. You're stronger, and it is a goddess who bore you, But he, meaning Agamemnon, is more powerful since he rules over more. That is to say, Agamemnon has a right to take whatever he wants, even if it belongs to Achilles fair and square.